Hey, deserving listeners, it's time to continue watching 90 Day Fiancé. Let's watch the show. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. As I always say, don't use YouTube as a replacement for therapy. If you need a therapist, get one. You deserve it. Let's watch.
And I gotta say, I was shocked that you two were still together. On a scale of 1 to 10, how are things between you and Mike?
6.
6?
I would say a 7.
7, okay. What is preventing it from being a 10?
So I don't know if she knows this. Sean is a very smart person, often has very wise questions, sometimes very therapist-like questions. And this is absolutely a therapist question that I will use sometimes. It's sometimes used in cognitive therapy. It's sometimes used in behavioral therapy. It's sometimes used in solution-focused therapy. It's a good way of assessing where people are at. Because if you just ask them, how you doing? Sometimes they'll give you an answer and you're not really quite sure what they mean. And to also ask the question with a number, then you get a different idea. So for Natalie, she's saying she's a 6 out of 10 with regards to the relationship. And for Mike, he's saying is a 7 out of 10. And then she follows it up with another question that's very therapist-like, which is, what would it take to get it up to a 10? It's a very concrete way of asking a question to get it. Because if you just ask Natalie, what do you want? She might not give a very direct answer. But this really locks Natalie in on, okay, I'm at a 6. What do I need to get to a 10? Let's see what she says.
I think me and Michael both need to work on our relationship.
Mm-hmm. That doesn't tell us much. That's pretty obvious, right? And my conceptualization of the two of them is that they both put up walls from the beginning. You've been hearing me say that. Mike is very effective at putting up walls. Natalie is less effective. She puts up less walls, but they both put up walls. And I think this is her way of putting up a wall. I would take a guess, because I've seen couples like this. It's not frequent, but I've seen couples like this where they give very vague answers. Why would they do that? Well, usually it's because they are caught between the lesser of two evils. They can be honest and spontaneous and open and vulnerable, but there's a lot of bad things that they associate with that based on their experience. They can risk getting into a fight. You know, maybe Natalie wants to say something critical of Mike. She's thinking, well, for me to get from a 6 to a 10, he has to change these things about him. And so she might be worried, well, that's going to get us into a fight, and I don't want that to happen. Or if I ask for something, I might not get it, and then that will hurt even more. It's easier to not ask for something and be disappointed than to ask for something and to be disappointed. That's much more vulnerable. It's much more hurtful. So she might be either trying to avoid a fight, or she might be trying to avoid the pain of being rejected after being vulnerable. And so there's a trade-off there. She's like, well, I'll be vague, which won't get me my needs. I won't be able to communicate things. I won't be able to get things off my chest. But that's a lesser evil than conflict and feeling rejected all the time. So I'd rather choose this. But what happens is that if you keep putting up the walls, then there's no opportunity for any kind of growth or any kind of understanding. Now, there's a third option, which I keep saying, which is go to couples therapy. When you break your arm, you go to a physician and they put a cast on. When you have something wrong you're having trouble in your marriage, you go to a specialist. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and there are many of us. I know there are marriage and family therapists in the town of Squim that they could go to. So anyway.
Natalie, why did you and Mike arrive separately to the studio this morning?
I'm not answering.
You don't want to answer?
Mm-mm.
Why don't you want to answer?
Because I don't.
Okay, so it's disappointing to Sean and us, I'm sure, because we're curious, we'd like to know. But she's entitled to privacy, and she doesn't have to say anything. And we don't know why. We could speculate as to why she doesn't want to answer. Maybe it's because she doesn't want to get into a fight. Maybe there's something embarrassing. Maybe she knows that if she airs dirty laundry, that it will hurt Mike's feelings, and then that will be bad for the two of them, and it will be bad for her. Who knows? There's just no way to know. There could be some other reason. I mean, there are other possibilities. Violence could have been in the past, and she doesn't want a bunch of reactions to whatever kind of conflict they've had. I mean, who knows? But it's in line with what we've seen from them in the past, which is when in doubt, self-protect. And we see the result of that strategy in the two of them over the 2 seasons.
The wedding, that day, the morning of the wedding. Why? Why did you do it?
So if we're not getting answers out of Natalie, I'm guessing we're not going to get any kind of answers out of Mike. I can't imagine. What do we expect him to say? I just can't imagine him being honest. And I don't think he's trying to deceive people. I think he is so afraid of vulnerability in general with anyone. I'm guessing if you were his friend, he probably wouldn't be very vulnerable, or maybe he would. Anyway, point is that I'm guessing he's going to say something along the lines of, well, it was just a really hard day, and I didn't know what to do. So, something real vague like that. Now, what would be underneath that? I don't know. We could only speculate, but I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't something like, well, I deeply love her, but at the same time, she has really hurt me often, and she kind of hurts me on a daily basis, and I don't say anything because I'm just so hopeless about bringing it up, and just little things that she does. Little things that she says, and she said them throughout our relationship, but I also really love her, and I've tried to communicate to her that I want her to change in my very stilted way, and nothing has really changed. And so that morning I just panicked because I was terrified that I was making the wrong choice because I was too desperate for someone rather than really wanting to be with her. Who knows what would be underneath the walls, but I wouldn't be surprised if something like that were down there. But given his way, which I'm speculating is a reaction to his very early childhood neglect emotionally. So when he was 2 years old, total speculation, he had to learn to put up walls and to not be vulnerable at all, because why be vulnerable if people are just going to reject you and ignore you? And then it becomes this habit that is neurological and is extremely difficult to change unless you go to years of therapy. So let's see what he says. Maybe he'll surprise me. Let's watch.
The actual night before the wedding, I got into my own head. I went down to the river, and I was gone for about 5 or 6 hours. I got scared. I was overthinking things. I just felt a lot of pressure. I was just feeling lost.
Okay, so I'm a little happy for him that he is able to be a little vulnerable. It's still pretty vague. What were you lost about? What were you worried about? That would be maybe Sean will ask that. So you sounds like you were worried about something. What were you exactly worried about? Because that is kind of the key here. I think all of us understand that he called off the wedding because he was confused and scared. But what was he scared of? Let's watch.
I was just not ready to get married that day.
That's cold, bro.
I got cold feet. I got scared. I know, I'm not trying to justify it any way. I feel like a piece of that went down that way. I do. I feel horrible.
Okay, he probably should have led with that, by the way, that he feels awful. And maybe he said this many times to Natalie. Hopefully he has. But again, we're still not really hearing what's happening. He's telling us, something. Yeah, he could have not answered the question, but so he's answering it in his way. But we still know exactly what was going on there, because it probably wasn't just that morning. We understand it probably wasn't just something that emerged that morning. It was probably something that has been present for months that he just never talks about, at least on camera. So let's see if he talks about what, the weeks or the months that led up to that in terms of what his emotional experience was and what was troubling him. Let's see if he can say.
I feel like I'm so little there, and I'm like no one can help me, and it just so many stuff running through my head.
Mike, man,
I'm sorry.
So I think that he is sorry, but given his way, he isn't super warm and empathetic about it. And maybe behind closed doors he is. I would hope that he is, but maybe he's not. And so I believe that he is sorry. And I think that he has a really hard time fully expressing himself. A lot of people do because of early childhood neglect or abuse. And yeah, it breaks my heart to see Natalie suffering from the clip. I don't know if I showed the clip. They replayed that scene where she's crying in the car. It breaks my heart to see her suffering, and then it breaks my heart 10 times more because we hear her reaction. Natalie's like, I just want to hug that girl. And yeah, you feel the pain, and then she's in pain now. So it's still confusing. It's still like this confusing aura around these two. So, but they're married now, so things should be good. But no, she's a 6, but she's giving a demeanor of someone who's a 3, right? So maybe we'll never find out. I don't know. I think I talked about this where I could see this going a number of directions, which isn't a genius thing to say, but I could see the two of them after the marriage and the certainty of marriage able to build a very happy relationship together because they did have a lot of compatibilities that we saw in the last season, at the beginning of the last season, the first season that they were on. And I thought, well, maybe they can return to that now that the question of marriage is now answered. And so some couples are like that. You know, they have all these uncertainties and it triggers themselves. They put up walls, they have conflict. But then they get married and they're like, okay, we're locked in and I feel like I can trust you, and they can move forward. So I had that as an option. I had another option where their compatibilities would get worse because religion or living in squim or the way that they talk about their feelings or something. Like I could see it going down that road. I could see it going down another road where they impulsively got married because both of them were worried about her traveling during the pandemic, and they were both only halfway in it and felt pressured to do something and kind of resent that, the two of them, maybe particularly Mike. There's another scenario where, although they at first did have a honeymoon period where they did feel close and they were like, okay, we're married. It's the question has been answered and now we can move forward. But their communication issues are still there because they're probably not going to couples therapy, and their conflict continued regardless. One could argue, and it's a pretty strong speculation, that they weren't actually fighting about getting married. They were fighting about the way they relate to each other, and they were just using the marriage or the engagement as what they were going to fight about. And some of you might be able to relate to this, that if you're having tension with someone, particularly a partner, a spouse, you might fight about money, you might fight about kids, you might fight about a TV show, you might fight about politics, you might fight about what you're going to do that day or what movie you're going to see. But that's just the content of the fight. You're not actually super angry about the movie you're going to watch. What actually is going on is how you feel about each other. And so one could argue that the two of them, that was their fundamental problem that wasn't solved after getting married. If you haven't become a patron of the podcast yet, you can do so now by going to patreon.com. That's how we know that you like what we're doing, by becoming a patron. It's a premium service, if you will. And you get access to our best episodes, really, when you become a patron. But it also just tells us that you like what we're doing. But only if you want. If you don't, totally cool as well. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.